Alright, so we're looking at a 2005 Honda Accord. I actually work on this car quite a bit. It's got 270,000 miles on it, so it's getting to the point where even on a Honda you're going to need maintenance items here and there and things like that. So anyway, she called me I guess earlier in the week and said it was creaking or making a bad noise, and it's getting progressively worse. Anyway, and I drove it around a little bit, and I definitely heard it. It took a little bit for it to start doing it, and then it started to do it. Hope you hear that squeaking. So I think when I drove it, you know, if you hit bumps or if you get in and out of the car, she said even if she gets in and out of the car, it'll creak or squeak. And it seems like you know, it's somewhat weight related, but anyway, I think I'm sure it still has the original shocks and springs on it, struts on it from 2005. So unfortunately I work by myself, so I can't really turn the wheel and be under there at the same time. So I'm gonna just get it up in the air and see what I find on it and go from there. I think it's a spring or a strut, but you don't want to just assume that because you can get burnt pretty easily on these kind of noises. It could be a ball joint creaking or anything. I mean, I doubt that, but we'll see if we can figure it out. Even by myself here, we'll try to manipulate it and get that noise to try to duplicate that noise under it somehow, and make sure before we change any parts on it. So I'll get it up in the air real quick. Sounds like it's coming from the passenger side. I am pretty sure of that, and then we'll see what we find on it. I think I just put a driver's side ball joint on this, so that is another thing I'm thinking maybe is the ball joints creaking on it. So we'll get it up in the air and see if we can figure out what exactly is going on with this. But I'll go ahead and turn the wheel a couple more times, let you hear it. Maybe I'll put you over there on that side and we'll get down closer to it. So I'm sure the camera picked that up, and you would think it'd be obvious when you jack it up, but a lot of times it may not be obvious. So hopefully we can recreate that noise when we got it up in the air. So I'm going to go ahead and get it up in the air, and then we'll find out what's going on. Alright, so I might have jumped the gun a little bit on my diagnosis of the strut spring assembly. I got it off, got the wheel up, and the suspension is unloaded, or it's unloaded right now. And I'll show you what I found. You can see this lower control arm bushing is kind of ripped and worn, and I can't make the noise with the wheel off, but let me see if I can show you what's going on here. You can see that, oh, my light fell off, of course. If you watch that control arm, the whole thing is moving around. Like right there, you can really see it. That should not be doing that. There should be no play at all in that. So that bushing is completely wasted under there, and needs a lower control arm bushing, which it's going to need. I think these come with the ball joint and the lower control arm. They're not super expensive, so that's 100% needs that. And then that's more than likely the noise. But if it's not that doesn't fix it, then we're looking at struts and shocks. But I'm pretty confident. Regardless, that's not good to have that much play in your control arm. So we're going to change that first and go from there. So I will order the parts and talk to her, and then we'll go ahead and change this lower control arm out. Alright, so I talked to her. We're going to go ahead and replace this lower control arm. The parts are on the way. First thing I'm going to do is take off the strut bolt that goes into the lower control arm. Should be 17 millimeter. And I'll go ahead and loosen that. Got a nut on one side and a bolt on the other. We may have to dry the bolt out a little bit. Yeah. So it's in there a little bit. I'm going to go get something to tap on that a little bit. Just put your nut back on a couple turns so you don't hit the actual stud itself or the bolt itself. And then just tap it out. Hopefully yours isn't seized real bad, and it should come out. So I'm going to go ahead and get something to tap that, and I'll be right back. Alright, so here's a better shot of that bolt I just took out. Here's the bolt, 17 mil. And it goes through the strut and then through the lower control arm. So we're going to get the ball joint out next. I'm going to take out this cotter pin, and then we'll unscrew the ball joint. Alright, it should be 17 millimeter. And we're going to use a ball joint separator on this. You don't want to damage your boot if you can get it, if at all possible. So we'll use a ball joint separator. I'm going to get that real quick, and then we'll set it up and hopefully separate this ball joint without too much hassle. Sometimes they can really be in there, especially on a car with a lot of miles. But hopefully the ball joint separator takes care of it. Alright, I went ahead and moved the brake caliper out of the way just to get this ball joint separated here. You want to use these if all possible so you don't ruin your boot. These can still ruin your boot actually, but you have a less chance of it happening. Yeah, I'm going the wrong way. There we go, so it popped. So, if you don't have one of these, you can rent one. If you don't want to rent one, you can put a pickle fork in there and beat on it, but you'll probably rip the boot. It is possible to still rip the boot with these if it's really seized in there, and sometimes it's unavoidable. But the best way to do it is to just use one of these. You can also sometimes hit the side of your control arm here and kind of shock it loose. It really just depends. Ball joints are unpredictable. Sometimes they pop out pretty easy like this one did, and then other times they can be seized in there really good. I had a Ford Fusion in here do the transmission on, and I had to drop the frame out, and those ball joints were a bear to get out on the passenger side. I mean, I had to replace them. There was just no way. It almost broke this. I couldn't even use this to get it loose. So ball joints are kind of the wild card, but anyway, this one popped out, so we're good. We're just going to loosen this out, and then we're going to go after the stabilizer link on the other side. And just so you can see here, there's no damage to the boot, still intact, still fine. So that's one of the advantages of using the right tool for the job, is you don't damage the boot. Like I said, I have had it happen where they've been damaged, but usually by then it's because the ball joints wore out and it's been in there so long and it just seized in there. So anyway, go ahead and finish taking this nut off, and then we'll see if we can get that stabilizer link out. That'll be the other kind of wild card in this. Sometimes those things don't want to come out, so we'll see what happens with this one. Alright, unfortunately this one is too worn out. It's just turning, and there's no way to hold it to stop from turning, and it's old. And actually, when I gave her a quote, I kind of built this into the price because this usually happens on these, especially an older one like this. So I'm just going to cut this one off and order a new stabilizer link. But if yours is in good shape, it should be a 14 mil, and it'll come off. Alright, so here it is, cut off. If you're doing this job, you may want to budget in for these, especially if they haven't been changed recently. They almost always do that, where they just want to spin, and there's really no way to hold them to get them off. So they're cut off. So now you got left is the two mounting brackets or bolts. You got one there and one here. I've already got this one broke loose, so I'm just backing it out. Got the bolt here, 17 millimeter, and then you have the one under here, which I believe is 21 mil. And then this thing should spool out. There you go. It's on the ground. So we'll get the new one real quick, slide it in, and then we'll start putting it back together. And you can see this bushing here is in really bad shape. I don't even know if this is even attached still. So yeah, it's attached. It's barely attached. So you can see it's all wilded out, and there's quite a bit of movement on the steering from that. So and then this one's real loose too. It's not as bad as this back one, but it's in bad shape. So that's probably what our noise was. Either way, this had to be replaced before we do anything else. All right, I got it all lined up. What I do on these is I put the lower control ball joint in through the arm, and then I kind of center this wishbone on the control arm, and then I just jack it up. And that way, otherwise you're going to be fighting it. It's pretty hard to get lined up if you don't do that. I just found through experience it's easier to kind of start the ball joint on the bottom, and then jack up the middle and get this wishbone almost where it's supposed to be, you know, within reason. And then they should start up. You might have to use a drift to get them kind of started. It's not the easiest thing in the world to get them started, especially if you don't have a lot of experience with them. But it does go back in. I usually get them started. Then you have to do a little persuasion with them, maybe a couple love taps, or I use like a drift and I go through it. And then once you put the bolt in, maybe give that a couple love taps. It'll straighten itself out. And then the other reason why you want to jack this up is you want to have the suspension loaded up when you tighten down the control arm bolts, because your bushings only have so much play in them, so if you tighten them up when the suspension is unloaded, then when you go to load the suspension, you're actually going to twist that bushing, especially this one here that goes up and down. You're actually going to twist that and put undue stress on it, and then it'll shorten the life of the bushing. So when you do tighten these, either have it on the ground after it's put back together, which I don't usually do because everything's in the way, it's harder. What I usually do is just put a jack under the control arm and jack it up to about where it would be if it was sitting on the ground with the wheel on it, and then I go ahead and torque them down. So do whatever you're comfortable with. It's easier for me. I can kind of tell where the suspension's loaded at on it, and then tighten it. Right now it's actually a little bit too high, so I'm going to go ahead and lower it down a little. And I got all the bolts started in it. I'll go ahead and lower it down a little bit, hook up this lower strut to it, and then I'm going to load it back up and tighten those bolts. And then we're almost in the home stretch. I'll have to go get a new stabilizer link for it, but other than that, we'll be on the home stretch. Alright, so I got all the bolts started everywhere, and I got it jacked up about where it'd be loaded if it was on the ground with the tire. You can kind of tell that by jacking it up, and then right when it starts to lift off the jack, let it down a little bit, and that's about where it would be if it was on the ground. So we're just going to go ahead and tighten everything up here. I'll go back over that one with a regular ratchet and hit that one again. So you're just going to go get your 17, your 21. That one's tight, and then you're going to have your 17 here. 17 right here. Going to tighten that, and then put your stabilizer link on, your wheel on, you should be good. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll put it on the ground and see if it's making any noise. Alright, I can't remember if I mentioned it or not, but make sure you put your ball joint nut and cotter pin back in, 17 mil. I went ahead and drove it a few miles and came back. There's no noise anymore. She does have someone changed her oil, I guess Valvoline or somebody, and left one of her shields down on her to get access to the oil pan. I guess they didn't put it back, so it's kind of scraping when you come to a stop. But you can see here, I'm going to shake the wheel back and forth and the noise is gone. So originally I thought I was pretty sure it was a strut or a spring, but that just goes to show a lot of times these suspension noises are kind of hard to track down, especially if you're by yourself. It's always good to have someone around to kind of help you try to find the noise, but if you don't have it, the next best thing is just really look over everything really carefully. When I first jacked it up, everything felt tight on the suspension. I always do a quick check and make sure the bearings and the wheel bearings and the tie rods and everything feel good. And when I first shaped it up, it felt pretty good. I didn't feel any play. But then once I got in there and saw that bearing or that bushing wore out, and just angled it a certain way, I could get it to move around a little bit. And that just, just keep your eyes peeled and just look at every single bushing, anything that can make noise. Real common, not so much in Honda, but on the other vehicles, is the sway bar stabilizer link. That can make a clunky noise. Usually a squeak like that is a bushing or a strut, usually a strut mount or something like that. But it appears that everything's okay on that, other than just that bushing that was bad. And obviously that was real bad. So anyway, that's how I went about figuring out what the noise was and changing that lower control arm. So hopefully this helps somebody. Thanks for watching, and as always, God bless.